Welcome. This is Jack Zenger. I'm here with my colleague, Joe Folkman. We are delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on the subject of identifying and developing relevant leadership strengths. Let me give you a broad picture of the overall presentation. We want to talk about the obvious question, what are leadership strengths? We also want to talk about how anyone can go about identifying what their strengths are. The third part of our presentation will be about how you select a strength to work on and magnify. And finally, we'll talk about alternative ways that people can go about developing strengths. We begin by making the observation that our research, and we have now an extensive body of research with some more than 1 million 360-degree feedback assessments on about 120,000 leaders worldwide. We have a very clear body of evidence that shows that excellent leaders are there because they possess several important or signature strengths. They're not there because they're perfect people and lack any weaknesses or failings. And they're not there because they're just average or good at everything. They are there because they possess a handful of strengths. And the slide that you see in front of you right now about multiple strengths making better leaders makes the point that when people don't possess any strength, they are, in comparison to their peers and other leaders in organizations, they're at about the 34th percentile. When they develop one strength, and whatever it be, at the 90th percentile, they suddenly kind of catapult upward from the bottom third roughly to nearly the top third. And then you can see that as they add successively more strengths, they become higher and higher until when they have a relatively small number of strengths, they're at the 90th percentile.
You remember when we discovered that, Jack?
It's been 15 years.
It's been
taxes my memory.
I'm telling you, Jack had this crazy idea. He said, I wonder what the impact of strengths would be. And so we did this study and we about fell off our chairs. That was incredible. I mean, we just thought it would incrementally move up a little bit, but these huge jumps and this idea that if you did 3 things well, you were in the top 20% of leaders. That blew us away. And it changed the way we gave people feedback. It changed the way we thought about development. That was a good day.
A very good day, yeah.
Well, I want to talk about this kind of dumb question, and we've got 3 dimensions there: patience, being directive, enabling others. And the question is, are these strengths? And when you look at those, the thing you can do is you can if you look at patience, you can say, okay, some people are patient, they're good at it, and some people are bad at it, right? They don't have patience. And you've heard the phrase, patience is a virtue, right? So having a lot of patience is a good thing, right? And we kind of believe that, but then Jack and I just did this research on our HBR blog a couple of weeks ago, and we looked at leaders who had a lot of patience, and guess what? They were less effective. So while it may be a virtue, we kind of got these mixed results. Some of you have had a leader who was really directive, so and you say, well, being directive is a good thing. Well, to a point, but there's a point where if you were too directive, and so here we're going to make this point. We're going to work it a little bit, and Jack's going to talk about it and help you understand it. Jack and I, in our definition of strengths, would say these are not 3 good candidates for strengths.
Let us tell you why. The topic of what is a strength has become a major controversy of late, because there's a fairly well-known person whose name is very much associated with the strengths development movement, who has taken the position that a strength is something not that you're particularly good at necessarily, but it is much more, it's a talent that you're kind of born with that comes to you very early in your life. It's something that makes you stronger, that after you've done it, you feel more energized. It's something that you look forward to doing. It's something that when you do it, you lose all sense of time. And that's his definition of what a strength is. Let me say that is not the conventional definition. We all possess a variety of behaviors. Some people have strong physical characteristics. Some people have perfect pitch as a musician. Some people have very fast reaction times when they perform or are involved in sports. We have a wide variety of skills and abilities, but these aren't leadership strengths. These are just particularly advanced characteristics or abilities that this individual has.
I love narcissism there, by the way.
It is interesting that there are those who are in favor of this whole strength movement who list narcissism as an important attribute to be developed. And so if there's one important message that we start this discussion out with, it is that leadership strengths are specific, and we are concerned that there are instruments out there that measure a variety of so-called strengths. And these instruments contain ideas or topics like context, or ideation, or intellection, or detail orientation, or connectedness, or common sense. And our point of view is that while these are interesting concepts and ideas, that they aren't necessarily related to leadership. And so what we are going to propose in terms of identifying and developing leadership strengths is that a leadership strength is, first of all, something that you do extremely well as it is perceived by others. It's used in a variety of situations. It always produces good outcomes. It has some intrinsic value in addition to those good outcomes that it produces. It's something that kind of lasts over time, and in general, it's valued across all cultures. So that definition of strengths, which is very much supported by the research of Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, and a number of other kind of very reputable psychologists, we believe is the definition of the kind of strength that we are eager to help you kind of identify for yourself and to develop. Our strong evidence is that strengths can be developed throughout your lifetime. They're not necessarily born into you, and they're not always in place by the age of 15 or 16, but they are something that you can deliberately select to work on and enlarge. And hence we think that a true strength is not something that can be overdone. And the examples that Joe used earlier, the example of a person who's overly patient, or the example of someone who is far too directive. Is being a little bit directive a good thing at times? Yes, it is. But you can be far more directive than is helpful. You can be far more enabling. You can be kind of a little bit too laid back, a little too accepting of what's happening unless you push. And so you now have our kind of definition of what a strength is. And now let's go on about, Joe, how we best understand our strengths.
So as you think about a strength and this idea of our definition is something that if you're better at it, it's going to be a good thing. Part of it, in assessing our strengths, it requires a couple of things. And one is some sense about our passions. It's difficult to be really good at something when you hate it. When I was in the 5th grade, I went to my mom and said, "Mom, I want to play the guitar." And she said, "I'll get you a guitar if you learn to play the piano." You know how this story ends, don't you? I mean, she signed myself and my 3 brothers up for piano lessons, and boy, we hated it. Mrs. South, our piano teacher, hated us. It was just a year of just awfulness. And at the end of the year, I didn't know how to play the piano, and I never got my guitar. I could have been a rock star.
You could have been, yeah.
Yeah. Didn't
Billy
happen.
Joel, right.
Well, again, what do you love? What do you enjoy doing? And the second thing that we need to think about is, well, what are we really good at? Now, sometimes those two things are correlated and sometimes they're not. What we've found and what we've looked at with our data for over many decades is that people don't judge themselves accurately. And some would argue that the person is the only person who can judge themselves, that other people are going to be biased in one way or another, and you are the best judge of your performance. And
let's be candid about this, Joe, in this webinar for our friends, and that is that we're talking about Marcus Buckingham, who's written a couple of articles of late where he has made this this strong claim that you are the only person who can judge appropriately what you're good at. You're the only person who can judge what your strengths are. Let's be straightforward about that. And while we very much admire what he's done to help establish the strengths movement, we don't agree with his definition of strengths or his focus on that they are something that you're kind of born with and that get established at a very early age, and they really can't change all that much.
And as we've all experienced, other people see us very differently than we see ourselves a lot of times, and sometimes we're very self-deceived. We think we're good at something, but we're not. This next chart I'm going to show you demonstrates this very vividly, and this is with about 80,000 leaders. This study was done. We rated the effectiveness of leaders, and you can see on the scale the 10th percentile, the 90th to 100th percentile, so the poor leaders and the good leaders. The black line represents the average rating of others on this scale, and so you can see that the worst leaders have a very low rating and the best leaders have a very high rating. And the red line represents the self-ratings. So as you can see, at the bottom of that scale, when other people rated leaders very, very poorly, the leaders kind of rated themselves as pretty good, right? They said, I'm fine. Well, it's a little bit lower, but not much, right? And you can see at the other end of the scale where, again, people rated a person very high. They were spectacular. But again, the leaders themselves, they didn't see it.
And it's fascinating that all the studies that have been done about, you ask university professors how they rank to their peers, and 80% think that they're in the top 10%. And if you ask people, how are you a good driver? How do you compare to other drivers? Almost everyone thinks they're in the top, the top third. Everybody thinks they're in the top half.
Yeah.
And if you ask people to be objective, how does your sense of humor compare to the other people's on a scale of 1 to 100? We'd all say our sense of humor. No one thinks they're below average when it comes to common sense, driving skills, sense of humor, and yet clearly, if you were being rational, you would say, well, there's got to be somebody down there that's in the bottom half of people who do that.
Well, and again, we're not only looking at the bad, we're looking at the good. And this is what's fascinating about it. People don't even recognize what they're really good at.
Right.
They don't forget about the bad stuff. We don't always recognize what we're really good at. Now, there are some things, if you say, who's the most accurate at assessing what you like, what you dislike, what gives you energy, what makes you excited, what is hard and what is easy and what you care about and what you don't give a hoot about. It's you. And so we'd like to be very clear about this. People aren't very good at rating their effectiveness. And sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. But they are very good at giving us an assessment of their passion and their energy and what gives them joy. And so there are some things where that self-assessment is very accurate. And I think we are the best person at judging what we like and
Yep.
don't like.
Yep.
What foods we like. I mean, nobody else can do that for us. As much as I've tried to get my kids to eat tomatoes, they will not do it.
They don't see the joy.
And I kept telling them, we have the same genes. You've got to love these tomatoes. So we have a chart here where we look at competence on one dimension and passion on the other dimension. And, you know, if you have high passion for something like gardening, it energizes you and excites you. What we find is that typically you're pretty good at it. And most of the time when you're passionate, I mean, I'd say a majority of the time, when you're passionate about something, you can be good at it. But let's say that you like to sing in the shower. And in the shower, you sound like you're just a genius, like you're one of the best vocalists in the world. But not always. Other people hear a different sound. And so what we're trying to point out here is that while our correlations are really telling, our correlations tell us that if you have a high level of passion and energy and excitement about a particular competency, you tend to be better at it. That's not always true. And so that's why one of the things we're going to recommend here is that in addition to assessing your passion and energy for something, you need that feedback from others to give you that other point of contact to say, do others agree that I'm competent?
So one of our objectives for today's webinar is to help you and the way you help the people that work with you, especially those of you who are in the HR function. How do we help people go about selecting a strength to magnify further? If indeed leaders are successful because they possess a relatively small number of strengths, how do you help people to work increasingly at developing this handful of strengths to a very high level? And we think there maybe are three important kind of building blocks to help make that decision. And the building blocks, these criteria for a strength to develop, would include something about which this individual is fairly capable, something you do quite well, something that you are highly motivated to do, the passion that Joe's just been talking about. And then finally, there's one more important element, and that is there a reason or a need for that strength to be used? And these three elements came together in the creation of what we refer to as the CPO model, or the competence, passion, and organizational need. These three factors, we think, come into play as any individual kind of thinks about, okay, what should I develop? So, first question is, can I learn to do this behavior at an extremely high level? Am I capable of doing that? That's competence. The second one is this something I enjoy doing? I've got some strong internal motivation to learn to execute this behavior well. Is it appealing and rewarding to me? That's this whole passion dimension. And finally, does the organization need this to be done? Is there value created when, you know, that activity would take place, or that behavior would be displayed? And so we believe it is this combination of competence, passion, and organizational need that are the three converging forces on helping you to decide what strength to work on. Now, there may be some other kind of issues that you might want to think about as well. Your position in the organization for which you currently work may also impact this decision. That is, it depends a little bit on what industry you're in. If you're a software developer, that's, maybe would call for some different kind of strengths than if you worked in the design department of a large, retailer or fashion designer organization. A sense of color, a sense of composition, a sense of those kinds of things are not required in all occupations. What function that you possess in the organization, whether you're in sales, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in quality assurance, whether you're in research and development, the function in which we work somewhat impacts the strength that we may want to choose to work on. Your position in the hierarchy, if you're a very highly technical contributor in the chemical research department, that's a very different issue than if you're the chief operating officer or if you're a senior VP of development or long-term planning. Those positions that you occupy also impact the strengths that you want to identify. So as you think about this and as you move on then to how do you really identify and calibrate those strengths, we believe that competence is best identified through the use of 360-degree feedback. And here, frankly, is one more place where we depart quite dramatically from our friend Marcus Buckingham. Buckingham has written frequently about that only you can decide what's important strength for you to work on, that 360-degree feedback has some inherent failings and errors that are built into it, and that he's kind of dismissive of that. We believe there's compelling evidence to suggest just the opposite, that as Joe has already pointed out, we're not very good assessors of our own strengths. Indeed, there's a phenomenon that psychologists have labeled the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that the people who are in the lower part of that bell curve tend to always underestimate or overestimate their capabilities. So people who are the least competent greatly overestimate their capabilities. And we've certainly seen that people who are the most proficient and at the highest performers tend to underestimate their capabilities. The argument that 360-degree feedback has bias in it has also been made by Marcus Buckingham and his colleague Ashley Goodall. We would counter that argument by saying the same people whose research they cited to say that when one person rates another one person, that in the words of the old philosopher Spinoza, who said, when Paul tells me about Peter, I learn more about Paul than I do about Peter. And I think the point that Spinoza was making has some validity in that when one person tells me about another, there's some contamination of the person who's telling me about the other. It's not all about the other. The fact of the matter is those same researchers went on to say, but when you have multiple raters, when several raters come together, now that bias, that idiosyncratic bias tends to be very much dismissed. And you now have a much greater representation of what is really the behavior of the person who is being rated. So, bottom line, we're strong advocates of 360-degree feedback being probably the single best way we can become aware of what our true competence is. We think passion is identified and measured by, other kinds of tools. And we're going to talk to you today, and we're going to offer to you the opportunity to take a new instrument that we have labeled the Leadership Strengths Magnifier. And note, we've said it's not just a strengths discovery instrument. It's not typical of what a number of other instruments that are out there do. It is focused squarely on the topic of leadership strengths. And finally, we think this element of organizational need is something that you can discover through your discussions with your manager, your discussions with some of your peers, your own kind of sitting back and analyzing what your organization needs you to do, you to contribute in the role that you currently occupy.
So we are inviting you to participate and actually go through and do this leadership strengths magnifier assessment. It's about a 20-minute assessment. A lot of times we've done assessments as part of a webinar, but this one is a little more extensive. I have to say that this is about the 7th iteration of this particular assessment. The first version was about 45 minutes to an hour. So we've shortened it quite a bit. We're down to about 20, 25 minutes. It's got over 100 items in it. But what it allows you to do is get a really good assessment of your passion and your energy and your desire on 25 different leadership competencies that we identify as strengths. And all of these competencies come out of research where we looked at what would differentiate a good leader from a poor leader. And what we know about these behaviors is doing them well has tremendous influence over your ability to be successful. So we'd invite you to do it. The link is there on this page, bit.ly/ZF-magnifier. This is case sensitive, so be aware of that. And you'll get the link on your email. After you do the strength magnifier, you'll immediately be able to get a report. It'll show you your top leadership strengths, the things you're most passionate about. And again, our research says that things you're passionate about, typically, you tend to be better at that. It will also show you the remainder of the leadership competencies rank ordered from the one that you have the most passion about to the one that you have the least passion about. Now, sometimes things that you're not very passionate about, you kind of know that. You sort of say, yeah, don't. But you might want to look at that list and say, are there any things at the bottom of that list that might be a detractor for me as you think about what Jack just talked about in terms of organization need? If the organization needs you to be strategic, or if the organization needs you to deliver results today or take initiative, if the organization needs you to be innovative, if it's low on that list, again, our prediction is your effectiveness might be lower also. So we encourage you to sort of think about that list, and what we'd like you to do is celebrate those things on the top of the list. What we believe those are signature strengths that you could develop into profound strengths that you could be incredibly good at and make a difference. Now, I'm just going to bring up a couple of pages just to show you what the report looks like. And you can see on this first page, we list the top 5 strengths and give a bit of a little description on it. And now let me go to the second page here. And then we list 6 through 25. And you can see what's, the rank order of those things. And you can get a sense for kind of where these things fall. Typically, when people look at this report, sometimes they're a little surprised, but most of the time they're kind of nodding their heads and saying, yep, that's me. but it's nice to get this because this gives you a pretty accurate, very accurate view of the things that really are going to charge you up and you have a lot of energy for. There's some other assessments that you could take. Jack, what to talk
Yeah, I'd
about
like to
that?
just talk about these other instruments that are available. There is an instrument that was done by some people out of the University of Pennsylvania. It is called VIA. It measures the virtues of being a good human being. It is free of charge. It is a fairly kind of lengthy instrument, but for those of you who are interested in getting an overall measure of some of your good qualities, we would encourage you to look at that. There's an instrument that I think a lot of you may have heard of. It is called Strengths Finder. It was established a number of years ago by the Gallup organization. It measures kind of 34 themes about how people think, how they make things happen, how they build relationships, how they influence others. It is not specifically focused on leadership behavior. I find the terminology to be a little bit hard to comprehend and hard for most people to kind of relate to or to digest. But it certainly has been around a long time and a number of organizations have used it. Strength Scope is a UK-based tool for measuring strengths. It measures 25 strengths that are kind of grouped into 3 clusters: emotional capabilities or behaviors, relational, how you interact with other people, into execution, and general thinking behaviors. It is not as long in tooth, hasn't been around as long as Strengths Finder, but it too is a useful instrument. We would submit to you that 360-degree feedback, most good 360-degree feedback instruments analyze typically 15 to 30 competencies and would certainly give you a good measure and a more objective, accurate measure of the competency side, the capability side of a strength, not always the best measure of passion. So as you receive this link to taking the Leadership Strengths Magnifier, when you complete it and you get your results back, you will then be given also a tool that helps you kind of think about how you implement those, create your own kind of personal action plan for moving forward. The 25 things or 25 dimensions that are measured by the Leadership Strengths Magnifier, you'll see here listed on the slide in front of you. Again, we would reinforce that these are very fact-based, empirically determined, truly differentiating competencies. They separate the most effective leaders from the average and the worst ones, and they are all predictive of important business outcomes. And we believe that they meet the criteria that we talked about earlier in terms of they produce good results. You can't do them too much. You can do them, and you can do them too much in the sense that you don't do any of the others, but you can't do any one of them to excess. You can't be too honest or have too great of integrity. You can't be too much of a person who communicates powerfully and prolifically. You can't be too much a person who is possessing business acumen. These 25 strengths that we've identified here truly meet that definition of strengths that we talked about earlier.
So what we wanted to do is briefly brush on this next issue, which is how do I build a strength? Some of our colleagues believe that what you're fixed at 6, the things you're good at is all you can be good at. We disagree. We think that people can continually develop and improve, and that the approach they use has an impact here. Now, most of us have spent most of our lives focused on what was wrong with us, our weaknesses. And I'd say that we all are pretty good at figuring out how to fix a weakness, but building a strength requires a different approach. And we call this different approach nonlinear development. And I have an example of that from one of the competencies, learning agility. Now, learning agility is this ability to be flexible in terms of your learning, to be open to feedback from others and willing to try new things and grow and develop. And as you think about how could I be more learning agile or have greater learning agility, you think about, well, I could just read more books or volunteer for projects or take yoga class. And what we found is those things, they don't work. That's kind of more of a linear approach. So to understand what people that were really skilled in learning agility did, we looked at 1 million raters of 88,000 individual contributors and leaders. And what we found is that there were 4 what we call companion behaviors or enabling behaviors that helped a person to be more agile. So people that were agile tended to be good at listening and learning and open to listening. They tended to be willing to stretch themselves. You know, a lot of people, when they just feel like they're overwhelmed, they feel like they can't take on another thing. And when they're in that mode, you'll find their ability to learn a new skill is very reduced because they just aren't willing to do something new. Another one was optimism, this sense of confidence that I can learn new things. I can learn a new skill. I can do things differently. And the last one was just the ability to be honest with yourself. So I want to talk about these 4 things really briefly. Listening and learning, it is an interesting skill, and what leaders often need to do is develop the habit of asking others for feedback. And the way to do that is not to say, how am I doing? Because all your direct reports will say you're doing great. It's to say, what could I do to make myself more effective? Or what could I do to improve the meeting we just had?
What one thing could I do?
Oh, yeah. Don't be too generous
Yeah,
there.
right.
Good, Jack. You know, be aware of how personal actions impact others. A lot of times we're oblivious to that. And your openness to seeking new ideas and diverse ideas. The second one is to stretch yourself. The extent to which you're willing to stretch yourself, to push the boundaries, to take on another thing. And what I found here is that you don't have to fix everything. I mean, one of the things we found in our research is that if people were really good at 3 things, they were in the top 20% of leaders. So can you open up yourself enough to say, I am going to prove this one thing? And so, you know, the point is that put some hard work into this, concentrate on this, put some time into it. And again, this willingness to stretch will help you to change. The third thing is optimism. And part of what we found is that people are convinced they can improve, they can't change, they won't. And just having that growth mindset, Carl Dweck talks a lot about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. This growth mindset is the mindset that people can change and improve. And the last thing is this is self-honesty, this willingness to be really honest with yourself in terms of how you're doing instead of self-deceptive. Now, here's what we found. We found in our research that if you were just above average on these 4 characteristics, on these four, you would be at the 79th percentile on your learning agility. If you were below average on all four, you'd be at the 22nd percentile. So if you're just above average on all four of them, you're going to be really pretty good at learning agility. The final thing I'd like to remind you of is the impact of working on strengths. And in the study that we did several years ago, we looked at people that tended to be focused on their weaknesses, on improving their weakness. The good news is they improved, and they improved about 12 percentile points. What was fascinating is when we looked at people that were building strengths, they actually improved 26 percentile points. They got 2 times the amount of improvement. And we think the reason that is because when you're building strengths, you have more passion, more energy, and you mix that passion in and you get more improvement. Before Jack wraps up this conversation, I'd like you to give us some feedback on today's webinar, because feedback is a gift, and this is a gift you can give to us. So you can provide your insights by taking a very short webinar survey. You can see the link bit.ly/ZF April 19. We'll be giving away 10 copies of our book, How to Be Exceptional, as a drawing from those who complete the survey. Let me share with you an early thanks for your input and your feedback.
Thank you very much for joining us on today's webinar, and we hope that you will take the time to take this leadership strengths magnifier assessment. We hope that it gives you some valuable information that you can use when you complete it, and you will then receive an action guide that will give you some very specific instructions about ways that you can utilize this information. And we sincerely hope that it will move you forward in developing the kind of leadership strengths that you aspire to have. Thanks again.
Thank you.